Jeff, very nice to meet you. Thank you for doing this.
Hey, Sean, good to see you.
Likewise. So, first of all, I can't miss the picture that you've got in the background of Satoshi Nakamoto. So,
Yeah.
where did that come
Yeah,
from?
so this is by a Scottish artist called Trevor Jones, who is kind of well known in the crypto space. He's done a few things. This was a little bit before the NFT boom, and I think now he's been selling NFTs. And so yeah, Satoshi sits prominently on my wall, and it's great because it is a real Satoshi Nakamoto, but it's obviously not Satoshi. And so I just happened to like this, so I got a print.
It looks pretty amazing. And what's also interesting is the background is obviously from the Financial Times, I think, which is the heading of the message in the Genesis block. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So it's from it's from that issue, which is pretty hard to get a hold of these days. If you've ever tried to, all the Bitcoiners have scooped them up. But yeah, it's from that infamous Genesis block message. And there's some of the other articles as well. And you can actually, it is a print, but he used the real newsprint to do it. And so you can actually read them if you get up close.
Oh, brilliant. So first of all, I'd love to hear an introduction about yourself in terms of your background and what you do.
So I guess it could be a bit varied depending on who I'm talking to. But I'm an engineer. I went to school for engineering. This is a real life engineering or mechanical engineering as opposed to software engineering these days when you hear the term engineer. And after I graduated school, I sort of went traveling, landed in New Zealand, and happened upon a teaching job at the university as sort of an interim short-term thing. But that was many years ago. And so now I'm a lecturer at the uni, and I started teaching math and physics. And in the last few years, I've actually transitioned a bit. And so I still teach those topics, but I also teach cryptocurrency and blockchain at the university. And that all spun out of when I found Bitcoin. And that was about, going back a ways now, it started in 2014. And so if you're familiar with the timeline, you know what was going on. There was a lot of media after, I guess, the bull run in late 2013. And so I missed all that. I didn't have any clue. But I saw an article on Facebook, of all places, and that got me interested. And I was quite curious about it. I thought it was a good idea, but I didn't have any money. And I remember looking up the price of Bitcoin, and it was about $800.
Is that's the bull run back then that we call it, right? 800.
Yeah, that's right. And this is all retrospective because I wasn't there feeling it at the time. But contrasting that with how much money I had about $800, and I thought, well, there's no way. I had a unit bias at the time, and so I put it aside and didn't come back to it for a few years. And then in 2017, I was working at the uni. I was teaching math and physics, and I started reading about sort of the modern day cypherpunks. So I was quite interested in Edward Snowden and what he was up to. And at the same time, the hacker group Anonymous was also making headlines. And also that all ties in with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So I just started reading some nonfiction books. Glenn Greenwald wrote a great one called No Place to Hide about Edward Snowden. And then Hollywood also made a good movie about it. And so that sort of reminded me about Bitcoin. And I remember very clearly after work one day, I was like, well, let's go check on the price of Bitcoin, see what it's up to. And so I found my way to CoinMarketCap for the very first time. And, regardless of the price, I was blown away because there was this whole listing of coins. And I was like, holy shit, I had some catching up to do. I looked at number 2, which was Ethereum, and I'd never heard of it. And obviously number 1 was and still is Bitcoin, and that's really what started it, and started my crypto journey. And yeah, so I've sort of re-architected everything about my professional life to make sure it involves blockchain in some way, some form.
Wow, that's awesome. You mentioned a couple of things there. First of all, unit bias. Is that right?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
The unit bias. So the unit bias says that when you see the price of something of a single unit, so if I see the price of a single Bitcoin today at like 48,000 US dollars, you might be tricked into thinking that you need that much in order to purchase one, which is true, but you don't need to purchase a whole one. So one of the benefits of all of these cryptocurrencies, using digital networks, is that you can sort of have many subdivisions, and that's one of the good features, about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, is how many decimal places you have, and you kind of see it in the media from time to time. It comes up, or when you introduce new people to it, they say, "Oh, that's expensive, I can't buy one," and then immediately you have to say, "Well, no, you can buy less than one." It used to be that you had to buy a whole stock as well, one single share, and you couldn't subdivide that. So for example, if you wanted to buy Berkshire Hathaway, which is one of the most expensive single shares, you had to be quite a wealthy individual. Of course, with modern infrastructure now, we can buy fractionalized versions of all these things.
Got it. Makes total sense as well. And you mentioned that you're now a lecturer in maths and physics. Can I ask what level? Is it like 100 level or 300 or master's level? Or?
Yeah. So it's introductory level, and so the students I teach, they're all either starting their engineering program. Most of the students are engineers. Some of them are in computer science and software, but yeah, most of them are planning on being engineers. And so I also teach a bridging program as well. So I teach students that for whatever reason either didn't make it out of high school, or they need another credit to get into uni. And so that's also part of the program. And so that's the calculus and the physics. Basically, if you know your physics, I teach Newton's laws, so classical mechanics at an introductory level. And I also teach electricity and magnetism. And then with the cryptocurrency stuff, that is more level 300 here in New Zealand. Is that right? No, I've got that backwards. Year 3, level 700 here in New Zealand, level 7 and 8. So that's more of the older, more mature students.
Got it. Yeah, I can kind of relate, because I think, back in the days I did electrical engineering, and we had to do a course in mechanical, like maybe a couple of classes. And I mean, I remember having to learn Bernoulli's equation, and I had no idea what it meant, but you just had to sit there, this is back in the late 90s, and absorb all this information the lecturer was throwing at you. And if you didn't understand it, I couldn't go to YouTube to hear it another way or be explained differently. I just had to read a textbook and practically failed the exam, really. But learning nowadays is totally different.
Oh, I mean, the change is incredible, and it is entirely due to YouTube. I honestly believe that YouTube is the greatest public good of modern times, maybe even more so than Bitcoin, at least in the short term. But I agree. So yeah, the same for me. When I was in school, you were stuck with your lecturer or your prof. And if you were keen, you could go to the library, or maybe make some friends that could help you out. But nowadays it's incredibly different. And so you really have to incorporate the YouTube alternatives into your planning. And sort of, we have to be careful not to teach with YouTube, because that doesn't make you a good teacher, but to encourage the students to, find a source. A lot of learning is finding someone that you can relate to in conveying those concepts. And so if you find a good YouTuber that you can relate to and that you can understand really well, that can be so much more valuable than having a lecturer. And to try to do it in tandem. So yeah, YouTube is incredible. It's done crazy things. Most people in crypto and blockchain, and even a lot of computer science and software these days, they all learn on their own on YouTube. And the price of an internet service provider is much, much more economical than the price of a uni degree. And so that's really changed a lot.
Yeah, and you also mentioned Edward Snowden and Glenn Greenwald as well, and his book. I remember seeing a documentary where I think Glenn flew to Hong Kong, and then they were like talking, and Edward Snowden had a sheet he covered over his head in order to type a password because he was that paranoid. And did you ever see Edward Snowden on the Joe Rogan podcast by any chance?
Snowden I have seen some of that, yes, that I recall. He was one of the first people to zoom in, right? Because he's in Russia.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that documentary is excellent. And I remember thinking the same thing, like he's under the sheet typing in his password, but he was buying himself time, I guess, by the seconds or by the hours. He was fully expecting to be found. And he was just waiting to make sure that he could sort of tie up the loose ends according to his plan before it happened. Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible story. And of course, now he's exiled. He is on Twitter and he occasionally makes video appearances. And I would encourage yourself or anyone else to read what he writes. He's like you say, he can be seen as a bit extreme, but he's very well versed in things like privacy, and in terms of how that relates to human rights. And so I'm just fascinated by the whole story. And just before our session today, I was thinking about it, about how no one still knows how he got his information out of the NSA. In the Hollywood version, he like puts a USB stick into a Rubik's Cube and smuggles it out. And he never disclosed details of how he was able to get, because it's all closed networks, right? And nothing's allowed in or out. And so I think that also was interesting. He's now publicly disclosed on Twitter, that he needed to use Bitcoin to pay for web hosting in order to be able to set up the whole thing, and so on. And so that really inspired me to check out, this decentralized cryptocurrency. What does it all mean?
Yeah, and indeed his book as well. I think you mentioned, was it Glenn's book you mentioned, or Edward's or Snowden's book?
I haven't read one by Snowden. Okay. It was by Glenn Greenwald, the journalist. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I just remember from the Joe Rogan show where Snowden was just sharing his background, how he grew up in a family. His parents were like part of the government as well, and all that. And then he was like seconded to Hawaii, and he was just sitting there, and then he just stumbled upon all this information. Amazing, as you say, fascinating story.
Yeah, fascinating story. And of course, he's changed that whole thing about how governments collect data and what they do with it, and whether or not they're allowed to in that whole legal process. He really blew the lid off of all of that.
Yeah. And then what about your rabbit hole story? I mean, you alluded to this a little bit back in 2014. You saw the price of Bitcoin, but is that the first time you heard about it?
That was the first time that I heard about it. And but before that, I like to say that all headlines lead to Bitcoin. But before that, like well before that, in 2008, I remember, this is obviously before Bitcoin, but the GFC was ongoing and it was making headlines worldwide, and it was quite a big deal, especially for people in North America. It dominated the news cycle, and I didn't have any money, so I didn't lose anything. But my parents, in terms of things like pension funds and retirement accounts, and that boomer age, they definitely took a big hit. And at the time, I had no idea like what it all meant. I had no idea how finance worked, none of that. And so I started learning about that. This is obviously preceding the Bitcoin days. And so I already had a pretty strong interest in how financial markets work, and basically how the money makes the world go round. And so when I saw Bitcoin, it didn't click at first, but I thought that's a cool idea. And actually there was a lot of China FUD around Chinese miners. And I remember thinking, oh, no one really knows what's happening inside of China. You know, when I was trying to make my decision as to whether or not to get into and buy some Bitcoin, and I ended up putting it on the shelf. And I'm glad I came back to it, but of course, wish that I came back earlier. So yeah, I think it all ties together, like financial cycles, the occasional crises, which we may be into now in the COVID era, and you know what's the way out? How can we try to protect ourselves? How can we ensure that labor contributed to society today can be rewarded and hold its value into the future for our next generation, for our children? Very important stuff, thinking long term. And so it all ties together. And it wasn't until SegWit. So the block size wars in 2017, that was when I first bought some Bitcoin. I had to get a Coinbase account. And I was basically, I still didn't really know much about it, but I was making a bet on the price going up after the hard fork. And but Coinbase had a limit. You could only buy, I think, $250 at a time. So I bought $250 before the SegWit fork. And that led into the 2017 bull run. And I was very green, and I bought all the way up. And then I just had to do a lot of learning all the way down.
I remember those days very clearly. You're exactly right around the fork, which was around Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Is that right? With Craig Wright. Yeah. I held all the way up and then held all the way down as well. So yeah. You mentioned that when you got into crypto early on, you had to learn about finance and money. And yeah, similar with me as well, because learning the crypto journey, you actually have to learn what is money. And I remember reading a book, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's a big, thick book. It's apparently about how the Federal Reserve was created back in, I think, the early 1900s.
I know of it, yeah, but I haven't got to it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating book. But what I wanted to touch on is that you mentioned that nowadays you're lecturing with your maths and your physics, but you also teach in Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, right? So you've managed to work this in as part of your career, which is very envious and enviable, because a lot of people, they're in their day job and they hear about crypto and they're doing this at nighttime and they want to get in the crypto industry. But how did you manage to merge this technology into your career and your courses?
Yeah, I mean, very, very good question. Yeah, you hear a lot of stories of this, people leaving what they, I guess, deridedly refer to as their day job, and making the switch. And so I still have sort of one foot in both, but I'm happy that I was able to. What I did was I looked around the landscape at the universities here in New Zealand, and I was looking for that Bitcoin class. There were a few already in America. This was in 2018, so a few years ago now. So the famous universities in America, they had some in their either computer science department. So every school has a computer science department, and depending on how big your CS department is, you might also have a distributed systems group. And so that is an area of academic research, which has now been completely overtaken by blockchain. But there's a bit of a lag between the entrepreneurs and the cypherpunks and and what happens at university. So I was having a look at these and seeing, well, what had other people done? And it turned out that no one in New Zealand had done anything. The only thing I could find was at the very end of one syllabus, I think it was literally the last word, the prof had put in the word blockchain, and it was in a cryptography class at University of Auckland. And I thought, well, this is great. No one else is doing it. So this is a perfect opportunity. And so I sort of got in touch with a colleague, the only other guy that was interested in blockchain. And together we built some papers and got them approved. And so they're still going, which is good. And the last I checked, they're the only sort of blockchain specific classes that you can take at a uni in New Zealand. And they're I guess maybe a plus and a minus is that they're elective courses. So they're not part of any core degree program, which means that basically anyone from any background, if they have space and time, they can take the class. The downside is that you're dealing with your audience is quite varied in terms of their own backgrounds. So we do a bit of coding, we do a bit of distributed systems, computer science stuff. The very first lecture is about the history of money, so we do a bit of economics as well. We do sort of a lot of blockchain conversation, and it goes a little something like this. I think a blockchain could help here, and then myself or my colleague will say, okay, well, how is a blockchain going to help solve that problem? And that's kind of, I guess, the trite version of what happens in a blockchain paper. If you look at other unis, they do get into a lot more technical systems work. But at this stage, for these classes that I teach, we don't do we don't do a lot of that. But if students come in with quite a technical background, then for sure we encourage that. And we do get some students that sort of write their own blockchains or piece together their own blockchains using contemporary tools. So I definitely got lucky in that sense that I guess we came along at the right time. We weren't too early, we weren't too late, and we got these new classes approved. And so yeah, moving forward, I'm hoping to concentrate entirely on that in terms of my day job.
Got it. So with this courses, you mentioned it's elective. What's the duration? Is it like a semester or like a couple of hours a week over a term?
That's right. It's one semester. If it's an undergrad course, the students generally get 3 hours a week. You can split that however you want. Most people will do a 1 hour lecture and a 2 hour tutorial where you go through some exercises or work on a project. And then at the master's level, it's 2 hours a week. And again, that could be split into 1 hour of lecture and 1 hour of discussion. So it's only a couple hours a week in session time with the lecturer. But the expectation is that outside of class, there's a lot more time, as you know very well.
Yeah. I found the topic so fascinating that as just like anyone else, I quit my job and just studied full time, because what happened was in crypto, you just learn so much, because as you mentioned, you learn about money, about economics, you learn about programming, about distributed systems, ones and zeros, 2 to the power of 256, public-private keys. It's just the whole field is just a huge rabbit hole, and it's just yeah.
I like to say it's a perfect storm, right? And the storm components are computer science and mathematics and economics, and then there's another one in there which is sociology, right? And the idea of incentivizing people to use a system such that you can say that it's fair or more fair than any other system we've known, and how about incentivizing people not to behave badly? And sure, you can try to attack the network, right? Bitcoin's the largest honeypot the world has ever known. And you're welcome to try to attack the network, but it just, it gets too expensive. And so people would rather play by the rules and earn some Bitcoin for themselves. I mean, it's incredible I guess it's game theory really between the economics and sort of the hardware and how people are looking at the system. So yeah, there's so many different angles that you can take, and difficult to be an expert in all of them. Best maybe to pick one that you've already got some background in and try to tackle that branch.
Yeah, and more recently around regulation and government, which is another aspect which in the early days everyone hated. If you're a libertarian, and it's like unbank the banks. But nowadays, I don't know if you heard, but CBA in Australia here are adopting cryptocurrency and adding it to their app, which was huge news about a month ago.
And CBA, that's a bank?
Yeah, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, who own ASB.
That's Commonwealth.
Yeah, CBA.
I guess I'd seen the headlines. Yeah, that's crazy news, right?
Totally.
That, and do they have? Is there a senator? That might not be the right term. Is there a senator there that is also backing this in terms of adoption in Australia?
Yeah, I think there is. I can't remember the name, but yeah, it's slowly making headways. But to have a bank come on board and provide cryptocurrency as part of their banking app, I never thought I'd see that day happen.
I mean, yeah, talk about coming into the wolf's den there, really, or the lion's den there, right?
Yeah. So with your background in maths and science, etc., how did you find yourself? Because you're part of the Blockchain Exec Council. How did you find yourself on there, and what do you do?
That's right. So a few years ago, so I've been following BlockchainNZ for a while, and a few years ago I had a startup, and so I was actually a member as a startup a few years ago. The startup didn't really get off the ground and go anywhere, and so that membership lapsed. And then also in 2020, so a year ago, I got the notification that there were some open seats, and so I put up my hand for an education seat at that time. And then so that didn't work out, and actually that seat went to Alex Sims. I believe that was just last year. And so okay, and then this year I got another notification, and actually what happened was I asked to join the AGM, the general meeting, and I was told that you had to be a member. And I thought that our university was a member, and so that sparked a whole conversation. So we now have the university joining as a member. This is just a few months ago, right? And with that, there was an open seat, and so it all happened very quickly. Brian put my name forward for the seat, and so I was in that seat as coming as from an education institution. But I think officially I'm in a corporate seat, which is fine. What I hope to be able to bring to the council is just that, which is my education background, in terms of bringing together a lot of different concepts and having to find a way to teach a variety of different audiences, and use the best path forward to promote blockchain, promote Bitcoin, promote all of the other good things that come along with it. So that's how I see it. And I was looking at some of the other chats that you've done, and actually the first two I looked at, both people put their hand up and said, "Oh yeah, I'm here for education as well." And so I was like, well, maybe I should contribute in a different area. But no, I don't think that's the right reason, and it doesn't hurt to have too many people going down that pathway. Maybe as an aside, I can perhaps be kind of like a technical pillar to lean on. In terms of published media and papers and articles, sometimes it can be difficult to get through some of the material and understand what's happening. So perhaps I can assist in that manner as well. I think I would consider myself maybe first a Bitcoiner and secondly a technologist. So like you mentioned about public-private key pairs, I love that stuff. I don't shy away from what an elliptic curve is and how it can be used, and perhaps the good parts and the bad parts, all the way down to the systems level. So I guess it's still early days, but hopefully I can contribute in a number of those areas.
Sounds great. I mean, yeah, I remember the public-private key pair. It took me years to get my head around that, but luckily I can see with your mathematics background, I mean, the maths language, so to speak, you'd eat that up for breakfast, I imagine.
Maybe not for breakfast, but it definitely makes a good afternoon snack.
Very nice. So what's on the horizon for you? I mean, so you're teaching crypto courses, you're lecturing. Do you have any side project, anything that you can disclose? But I mean, what area interests you, for example?
So I guess many things interest me. A few things to note maybe are proof of work and mining are something that I've been thinking more and more about lately, right? And so, proof of work is the underpinning of Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency, and many other cryptocurrencies as well use proof of work. Currently, Ethereum is still a proof of work system. And so this year, I think, earlier this year, there was a tremendous amount of media attention given to Bitcoin's energy consumption. And so I've been thinking a lot about proof of work, kind of from a very technical thermodynamic standpoint. And I guess there's one question. I've been following a few debates on Twitter, and there's one question is that can proof of stake, which is what Ethereum hopes to shift into perhaps next year, can proof of stake be as secure as a proof of work system? And some people get very opinionated about this, but I don't think that the issue is settled just yet. We'll have to maybe wait and see. Ethereum's the first major network. I would consider it decentralized to shift into a proof of stake setting. So they really are the vanguard of that entire paradigm, which is, can we remain decentralized? Can we remain secure? Can we incentivize actors in the right way? And can we do it without having to manufacture ASICs? And so I don't have an opinion other than that I think it's an experiment and it's not settled. But I've been thinking about that both from the Ethereum and the Bitcoin side. I think Bitcoin mining itself has also made a lot of progress, even though it hasn't really technically shifted in any way, but that's probably a strength. But I think there's been a lot of positives to Bitcoin mining that have really happened in the last year as well, to strengthen proof of work, as a viable and valid system. And another thing that I do have a few ongoing projects on around decentralized identity, or how can we leverage perhaps some benefits of a blockchain in order to assist people maintain control of their own identity in a digital manner. And so I have some ongoing projects with that right now. And I feel like I'm just sort of learning the ins and outs of what identity means, what digital identity means, what are some of the possible solutions. I think we know a lot of the issues around identity. Certainly with centralized identity, we know a lot of the issues and we've seen a lot of the damage that can do. But I think there's a lot of hope that identity in a decentralized manner can really sort of return some of the power back to the user. And really, the way it looks like it's going is that users are going to be able to keep a portion of their digital footprint solely locked up on their device, and only reveal some of it as necessary wherever they go. And So I think that there's a lot of promise in this area as well.
Indeed, it sounds fascinating. I mean, there's so, like you say, there's so many avenues you could go down in your research. I couldn't help notice, we started talking about the first artwork there with Satoshi in the background. I just wanted to end with the other piece of artwork, which I believe, is that Neil Armstrong on the moon?
That one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a real NASA photograph. And it's just that, I think it's from a late mission. There's a rover in the background there, and so that is from Apollo 17, one of the last missions to the moon. And I just happened to pick that one up on TradeMe, yeah, it's a real NASA photograph, either from the moon or from a Hollywood studio, depending on what side of that debate you lie on.
Indeed. I mean, astronomy was my favorite topic as a kid, and I was devastated to learn that Pluto is no longer a planet.
Well, it's a planetoid, yeah. So maybe there's a few others that are in the category as Pluto as well, but they look like potatoes, right? Whereas Pluto actually looks like a planet. It maintained its spherical structure. It had the critical mass, but its mates are a bit misshapen.
Yeah. And then, well, you did point to another picture behind you, which that's not a note, is it?
Yeah, I mean, a keen eye will know what it is. You may not know this, but I'm a trillionaire. It's a $100 trillion note, yeah, from Zimbabwe, which is I guess it's past tense now, a famous experiment in monetary debasing.
Yeah, I mean, I heard the story how people were they had all these notes in a wheelbarrow, excuse me, all these notes in a wheelbarrow just to buy a loaf of bread. I mean, I don't know if that was true or not, but it's something I heard.
I think it definitely is true. And you see the same thing in Venezuela, right? They've had 3 debasements in about 4 years, I think. And so, I mean, absurd stories, kind of like wartime, where people were using notes to burn them for the heat. And in terms of Zimbabwe, you know, Zimbabwe is a long way away. I think it still has a value of maybe like $50 or something. The $100 trillion has an equivalent US dollar value of about 50. They'll give them to you if you go to Zimbabwe, but if you buy it on eBay, you have to pay a premium.
I remember a couple of years ago watching Andreas Antonopoulos, one of his YouTube videos, and he was saying, or someone was saying, that you'd go to a restaurant and you'd order something from the menu, and by the time you went to pay, the price would change during your meal.
Yeah, completely absurd. And like from my standpoint, or from our standpoint, you know, in a nice, stable country and economy, you know, these are the stories of fiction or of films. But it's incredible that, you know, many people in the world today, you know, live under sort of a modern hyperinflationary regime or context, and you know, it affects a lot of people. And you know, that's one of the benefits of decentralization, is that you can have a system that doesn't adhere to borders, and that's truly global. One of the first easy rebuttals for people that say, well, Bitcoin is just, you know, digital payments, or that's just a digital version of what we already have. Usually, aside from these people maybe not having done a lot of homework, they're coming from a context of having like a nice stable system. They probably have a credit card, they probably have a mortgage, right? But you know, something like Bitcoin is a truly decentralized, borderless system, and I think that's often overlooked in the debate, in terms of the value that it can bring. And if it doesn't bring you value, well, that's okay, because it quite possibly could help somebody else. Nowadays, it might be a little bit expensive in terms of fees for some of the you know, unbanked or some of the poorer countries in the world to buy Bitcoin. But there are solutions to that are coming around as well. You mentioned Antonopoulos there. he's kind of faded a little bit recently, working on his own personal projects. But one of his YouTube interviews was very pivotal for me as well. I remember him talking about the situation in Greece, which is where he's from, and how they were undergoing a lot of inflation. This was, I think, as they were trying to join the EU, so that they could have the euro as their monetary currency. And it really hit Andreas hard, because he was telling the story, about his mother's life savings that she has in a Greek bank account, and how it was really important for him to be able to convince her to convert her life savings into Bitcoin. And so that really was an influential moment for me, watching Andreas tell that story. And of course, he's an OG. His book, Mastering Bitcoin, is one of the best technical descriptors of Bitcoin and the software around.
Yeah, indeed. I think anyone who wants to get into Bitcoin, including myself, have watched hundreds of hours of Andreas on YouTube. So thank you so much for your time, Jeff. It's been amazing talking to you and learning a bit more about your background. Love the 3 pieces of artwork you've got in the background as well. And yeah, thank you so much.
Cheers, Sean. It's been great.
Awesome. I'll catch you later.
Bye.